Since we didn't finish in class, let's take a look at the rest of this nationalism unit so that you can complete your study guide. All right, so we've just unified Germany and Italy, and now we need to take a look at the reformation of Greece. Greece has been incorporated into the Ottoman Empire, and we geographically refer to this region as the Balkans. It is culturally very different from the Ottoman Empire. There's predominance of Christianity here. This is the Eastern Roman Empire, or what was left of it from the Byzantine Empire. So it's way more like Europe than it is like the Ottomans, even though they've been a part of the Ottoman Empire for so long that they still look different than European nations. But this Balkan region is notoriously impoverished. They tend to not be unified in general because of this mountainous region. And if you recall from 6th grade, hopefully, when you studied Greece, Athens, and Sparta, that these two city-states and all the other city-states really did not feel any sense of nationalism. They didn't look at each other and say, oh yeah, we're all Greek people. They hated each other's guts, as a matter of fact. It wasn't until Alexander the Great comes along that we see the forced unification of this region. Well, being a part of the Ottoman Empire and being the individuals who are paying into this Devshirme system, it seemed like they were just going to kind of linger here for an extended period of time. But then this happens, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 that we just discussed in class. And the Austrian Empire is really huge and now has a direct border with the Ottomans, and they are very, very uncomfortable with this. What would make them much happier is if some other poor nation had to deal with the presence of the Ottomans right on their border, and that means Greece. So the Austrian Empire is going to funnel a lot of money into Greece, and they are really going to touch upon their sense of cultural nationalism. During the Enlightenment period, what better group to go to and say, you are the reason Enlightenment exists. You invented Western philosophy. You were the original democracy. This is all about you. Come and embrace your heritage, embrace your roots, and be independent. And this will be very, very successful in rallying the Greeks to that sense of Greek culture, the fact that they are outside of what makes Ottomans, and with the financial backing of quite a few European nations, most notably Austria, they will become independent. Now, this is the beginning of a long, well, it's not even the very beginning, but this time period is the beginning of a long decline of the Ottoman Empire. If you look here, you can see that they've already lost Crimea a while ago. That's to Russia in a war. And then they're going to be losing these regions here, and from the east and the north, the west and the north, and then working their way towards the Middle East. By the time that World War I is breaking out, what's left is pretty much just the Anatolian Peninsula, modern Turkey, and these coastal regions along the Red Sea and the Tigris and Euphrates and their access into the Persian Gulf. Now, one of the ways that the Ottomans are going to try to deal with this weakening of their empire is something that we refer to as Ottomanism. Ottomanism is the attempt to unify the Ottomans by reducing the amount of diversity in this empire. Now, I know this first bullet point here says that this is prior to the 1876-1878 first constitutional era of the Ottoman Empire. We haven't covered that yet, but I'm going to say it now so that when you get to it, you'll be like, oh, wait, I think this was before then. They're going to get a constitution, but not yet. They're going to try to avoid the constitution and avoid this more liberal concept by going back to a more conservative form of rule. You will comply with our religious beliefs. You will follow our language requirements. You will be culturally more like an Ottoman. This totally backfires. And instead of creating a unified state, it just really pointed out to all of these millets and people under their control how much they were not really part of this Ottoman culture and deserved their own autonomy to become their own nation state. Self-determination, all of these terms apply here. Okay, So now we have to go all over the place. We have a few more residuals from Spain, which are still kind of that echo of Napoleon marching through the rest of Europe. So first we're going to go to the Philippines, and we're going to take a look at the propaganda movement. This is a pattern that happens a lot in places that have been colonized. In order to get an education in a colonized nation, those who can afford to, usually of the local population, those who can afford to send their students, their children, to the colonizing nation. These are powerful nations with good schools, and they want their children to have the best opportunities. So, privileged Filipinos are going to send their children to Spain. There they will get a Spanish education, and what they will bring back with them are these very liberal ideas of enlightenment. Now, it's kind of ironic when you consider how conservative that the crown is itself, but it doesn't change the fact that when they go back to the Philippines, they want reform. They're not calling for independence or constitutional monarchy. They just want to see that there is more enlightenment occurring, equality between the people who are native, the Filipinos, and the Spanish colonizers. Now, we call this the propaganda movement. And honestly, it's a terrible name for it, because it's not really about propaganda. It's about reform. But needless to say, the Spanish are going to come down like a hammer on the Filipinos. And by doing this, they're going, by coming down so hard on them, it's actually going to spark a revolution. You cannot, as much as these very conservative monarchs want to, you cannot control the population through force anymore. You're going to have to meet them halfway. So the Philippine Revolution begins in 1896, and the United States kind of gets involved because we're at war in the Spanish-American War with Spain. And we see this as an opportunity. We tell the Filipinos if they are interested in gaining their independence, then they should fight with us and for us, and they do. And when all is said and done and the Spanish-American War is over, we kind of do a really terrible thing. And we say, well, glad you think you have your independence from Spain, but now you are a colony of the United States. And we add them to our growing empire. We very, very much want access to the East, something that we have not had access to historically as a nation. And this gives us the opportunity to be in the thick of things, insofar as Japan is concerned, and China and Southeast Asia and even South Asia. It's a very good stronghold for us. We will completely abandon the Philippines during World War II, and that terrible choice will lead to Philippine independence after that. One more thing we want to look at here, and that's Puerto Rico. Lola Rodriguez. I really don't think that you will be responsible for her name, but she is a required example of Puerto Rican nationalism, and she was very important in her time. She was a poet, she was wealthy, she brought the idea of the Enlightenment salon to Puerto Rico, where everyone sits around and sips coffee and talks enlightenment, but she wrote poetry too. And this poetry was very nationalist it was romantic too, but it was very nationalist in its design, and it was supposed to get people very excited about Puerto Rican independence, and it did, to the extent that she was exiled numerous times from Puerto Rico. And at one point she gets exiled to Cuba, where she then takes up the Cuban independence cause, and then they exile her from there too. She ends up in the United States for a while, and then eventually settles into Puerto Rico once again. But she is an example of somebody you could name if you were writing about cultural nationalism. Now, you could just as easily, if you can remember her name, Lola Rodriguez de Tio, you could talk about cultural nationalism in Greece. You have options, but this is just another example. But I'm not going to test you on her specifically, and I am positive you don't have to know her by name on the AP exam. All right. Let us get now to Great Britain. We are in New Zealand, which has recently, historically, been colonized by Britain, who has also taken over Australia. Now, there are already people living in New Zealand, and these are the Maori people. They are living in independent tribes that are often at war with each other, and so they're not really unified as a people until they have something to unify against, and that, not surprisingly, will be the British. They, as the British start showing up in 1840 and using it for agriculture and for, their herds, the Maori unify as a group and start rebelling against the British. Now, they are fearsome warriors and they are successful for a period of time. But long story short, what happens is by 1872, they no longer have these kinds of options. The British are more familiar with the island, they've industrialized even further, and the Maori are coming under the control of the British government. This is an excellent example of unification of the Maori people because of the common enemy of England, so political nationalism. I wanted to show you this picture as well because this is something that's going to tie into what we're going to look at in Unit 6, which is what is deemed as the civilizing effect of Western civilization. The Maori are very well known for tattooing. The women tattoo, the men tattoo. And the British are going to look down upon it as being uncivilized and encourage them not to do so. This is kind of like what we did with Native Americans. Abandon your Native American dress and headwear and become more westernized in your appearance. So this is just a really fascinating photograph, this type of photography that actually removes the tattoos in the photo so that you can see the person underneath or behind the tattoos. This is going to be something that completely has no impact whatsoever on Maori people. As a matter of fact, lots of people get tattoos in the Maori fashion. But I wanted to share this with you because I wanted, for those of you who are already aware of how we treated Native Americans, this is not going to be unique. And we will see this in Africa, we will see this in India, clearly in New Zealand, the United States, anywhere there are Aboriginal groups or natives that Westerners feel are culturally inferior to the colonizers. All right, so that wraps up our lesson on nationalism. Please feel free to ask if you have any questions, and I will see you in class.